Can I start out with one thing? And
Yeah.
we're also from the same neighborhood.
Yes.
We got a rep hard out here. That's
We're working a couple of projects together right now.
Yes.
But thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you.
I am going to look down at a lot of notes today because Shawn and I get started talking and we find that we're talking to one another and not to you. So we're going to try and answer the questions we think you have about the exhibition today. So it's good to see you again.
Great seeing you.
I'm excited about the show. I'm sorry that today was the first day I came through the space, peeking it online.
Yeah.
But I also felt really great to see that you had juxtaposed some older works with the newer.
Yeah.
Because now we can take a walk through about what the practice was and now what you're growing it into.
Right. Yeah.
So we just had a really lovely discussion about the silhouettes and how I've always thought about how you darken the skin in the photography and how a lot of people may not understand why you're doing that. So I thought, let's talk about that before we start jumping into the newer works.
Well, silhouette work for me, it was a discovery when I was looking backward into the process of Black artists and Black art through American history, and how important it was to create an identity. And in the Harlem Renaissance, Dr. Alan Locke basically made the silhouette the ad hoc Black identity sort of tool, if you will. But it goes back even further than that, because the creation of the silhouette and the cameo, you can see that in the antebellum stage. You could see that during slavery. You could see that people wanted their identities, but the only ways that these identities could be captured was by lighting with silhouette and doing the trace. And I always thought that was powerful, because the desire to see oneself outside of their own body, particularly for Black folks, particularly throughout Black history and its spectrum of importance of understanding Black identity, I thought that was a really wonderful place to root my own practice first. And then after investigating more about the silhouette and then looking at the paintings of Aaron Douglas and how he created sort of a storyline and a greater mythology around the power of silhouettes, Black figures, and Black presence in his sort of fantasy spaces where Black people were marching up mountains and attaining all the things that we talked about in dreams and the things that we really wanted to see happen in our lives. It was coming to life in his work. And I wanted to represent some of that in my early photography. And it's funny, because when I first started doing it, there was a photographer, unnamed gentleman, that told me it would never work. He's just straight up like, that ain't doing it. And
we've chosen two people who had really strong ideas about how Black portraiture should work that did not necessarily align with some of the greater speakers of the day. So you're using Locke, who you know was...
Yeah, I knew it. You know, I mean, Alan Locke, you can't go wrong, you know, going back to the godfather of the Harlem Renaissance, intellectually and artistically. And I was like, you don't see it. You know, it was surprising to me, but I pushed forward, did the work. And interestingly enough, it ended up being more of a commercial success before it became a popular success. I was reached out to by Apple to do a lot of the silhouette work that people kind of like know, you know, like people with their AirPods and doing flips and handstands. That was my stuff. And I just was like, okay, I think I'm on to something, because that also let me know that I could take different avenues.
Okay.
You know, I knew that I could do the art that would satisfy me, but I also knew that I could create a living around it.
But you also started thinking a bit to the future, like creating historical context that we had not actually forged into yet, right? With the Afrofuturism.
Right. Well, Afrofuturism was, I was never a big fan of Afrofuturism. Because I was like, well, we're not rectifying anything having to do with the past. We're just creating more of the same that I saw happening in the Harlem Renaissance. We're not speaking to a past, and we're not speaking to a connection. It's very sort of, it's like looking at spokes on a wheel going around. Like, you know, these things outside are moving and they're connected to something inside, but we're not talking about this central spoke. So I wanted to start doing Afro mythology, you know, and connecting those spiritual conversations that had not happened. And I was surprised to find out that we did not have, intellectually speaking, from the past 100 years, any sort of codified language around Afro mythology. And there's mythology that we have borrowed from our colonizers in one way or another. Mm-hmm. There's mythology that we borrowed from our ancestors on the West African coast. There's stories and things that have traveled forward, but there has never been anything that's about us, from us, and puts together our stories to create an ethos. So I was like, all right, this is a good place to start conversations about what we want. Literally, what do we want when we talk about mythology? And I think to be a futurist is to be fully vested in myth first, because most of the future is built on myth.
Sure.
You know, so that's the work that I set out first to kind of capture. When I was doing street photography, I wanted to have a similar kind of view of the black body in space as the space was changing around them. So gentrification was part of my lens. And it's interesting when you talk about place and space and time and what you are and who you are in those moments. If the things around you continue to change, how does that change you? And as a culture, I was always curious about how we saw ourselves in the face of changing narratives that were out of our control, specifically in gentrification. And to me, it was just an extension of what was already going on with the Great Migration. I don't think the migration has ever stopped. It impacts us. Like, we are still being pushed by forces we don't have control over. But what does it mean to find oneself in a space where there is history, but you are now instantly disconnected from it because it was here today and gone tomorrow? And much of my street photography was about that, about finding how we practice being ourselves against a stage that's constantly changing.
So is that narrative also bleeding into some of the newer works?
Oh, absolutely.
Can you pull out one from the show so you can walk us through it?
So Bus Stop is probably one of those that I would say does it for me the most. When we look at Bus Stop, it begs you to come and say very specific things. You're thinking Jim Crow. You're thinking civil rights. You're thinking, the movement of Black people in space, but it's not necessarily saying, okay, these Black folks with these tickets are moving from one place to another. It's actually a commentary on spirituality. Each one of these figures represents a different deity. So there's Oshun, Alegba, I'm drunk because I do too much work. But Alegba, Oshun, and I can't remember who else because I did too much work around it. But each one of these spirits are coming with us along the journey through what it is to be Black, and they're behind us. They're coming after the fact. So I'm using the Coca-Cola branding, which is very specific branding. It was the type of Coca-Cola branding that they use down south. There's different branding for each region, and the typography is just slightly different. So I'm giving you the understanding that, yes, this has to do with migration moving from south to north and then outward, but its origin is in the south. But these are representations of deities, not just people. And I think that's something that we don't consider a lot when we're talking about Black spirituality, is that it is a spectrum that pulls from so many various sources. And my favorite sources are the ones that typically cause the greatest conflict within Black communities. So
no. I'm just like, I was really excited about this piece. Shawn and I love to start digging into other articles that start to talk about these themes. And so I thought I had remembered one that The Atlantic did, and it was called A Brief History of Racist Soft Drinks. And that one goes into the Negro market departments that Pepsi and Coca-Cola used.
Yes.
And the other one is a really great one the New York Times had called When Jim Crow Drank Coke. Now that one is fascinating, stuff that I didn't even realize, because I think a lot of our grandparents talk about Coca-Cola actually having cocaine.
That's correct, yeah.
But what I didn't realize was this, and this is before 1903, that the widespread panic that African Americans were drinking this and then raping white women was a push to stop them using cocaine, but then to fuel it with more sugar. And I just, once I saw this piece, I was like, oh, I have to talk to Shawn. I wanted to talk about all of it. But if you haven't read these articles, they're fascinating.
Yeah, you guys send that one to me.
I mean, yeah, right. But in previous years, Coca-Cola has given more money to, I think, like $500 million.
Right.
They donated to the NAACP so that they could put it out into Black businesses. But this is also only after, I think, what was it, 2020? Like a little before there. 2020. That the Black employees wound up suing them when they could see this division between, the company. But I think it's a fascinating, just like deep dive into that history.
And there's another book that you should check out. It's Celluloid Mammies and Uncle Tom's, I think it's called. But they go into what it means to advertise and brand toward the earliest of African Americans up to the 1970s. So a lot of that conversation, like different types of typography, and then the exploitative use of African Americans in all of the advertising. Like my favorite was the alligator or the gator and a black baby, and the black baby is always bait, and you see those things happening. So, and to me, it's a fascinating thing that there's this impending doom, but it's meant to sell soap or a product of some kind.
But it did it so well. So like, that's the other thing, like within these companies, these advertisers were pretty famous because these campaigns did work, right?
Yeah.
It worked really well in creating this sort of like goodwill between Coca-Cola and the African-American community, as well as Pepsi. I'm not just going to throw it all on Coca-Cola.
All of them.
Yes, all of them. But to say that is then I just want to jump around the corner. I don't know if anyone had a chance to check out the pieces on the opposite side of this wall where we have the name of the show, Race of Angels, which I'd love to get into.
Race of Angels, yes.
But I was so struck by those pieces, the church fans, the women's faces, these old photographs that I think you describe as like lost photography, that it doesn't necessarily belong to anyone, that you find and you create these narratives around. So maybe we could talk about that a bit.
I love going to estate sales, and I love buying up old photos. I have tons of old photos that I've collected from various estate sales around the country. And I started working with two dealers exclusively because I found out that they were getting the majority of the work, and they were also like I would sit down and cross-reference it and find out that this is a piece from this one, and I could start piecing together this county. It's a 3-county area in Alabama that I was getting most of this work from. But to say all that to say, I love finding these stories because these are typically, when you lose photography, it's to something, it's to something great. There's death, there's divorce, there's drugs. Those are the 3 Ds that the dealers taught me. Those are the 3 reasons that they usually end up getting photography. And they don't, there's racism even in the aftermarket, this market of selling old found photos.
Also,
they'll sell black photos by the pound, whereas they will go through families of white folks and like really get down to the nitty gritty of the details, and each one will be sold more individually. But when it's black folks, that's just because they don't see the value in it. Oh, we got a 50-pound bag, we got a 100-pound bag, we got a 6-pound sleeve. It's always by the pound, and I always thought that was very interesting that they would choose to sell that way because they did not take the time to see any historical relevance inside of this group of this bag of photos.
Right.
So it's a part of what I have to deal with, but I have yet to address it because I do like getting quantity. But then there's also the guilt that is associated with like, wow, I feel like I'm buying by the pound, and in a way where it feels like, wow, this is similar to being on the block or buying off the block, a whole family, if you will, or splitting a family up. But when I find these pieces, the good thing is that I'm able to piece together the narratives because I can see lives as they are aging from baby on up. Sometimes I find an entire life, and I've been fortunate to find entire lives of people that I've been able to then turn around and box it back together and try to reach out to the person to see if they want it. Sometimes it's cool, sometimes it's not. Sometimes people don't want anything to do because there's so much pain associated with these photos. And, you know, the ones that I keep, the ones that I use, particularly this group here, that's my aunties. I have a whole collection of aunties. And for that, and this is kind of a funny thing because this body of work started maybe 3 or 4 years ago with church fans. And I made these, I think it was 4 years ago, actually. I did church fans, and I put the aunts on the church fans. And I came to the gallery, and I was talking to Sarah and Jason. I was like, I don't know what to do with these. You know, I was like, something is talking to me about this, but I don't know exactly what. And I gave the fans to them because I just wanted to have some distance and separation from it for a while. And then it hit me when I was looking at some of the clues that I was discovering within Afro mythology. There's only 2 types of mythological starts or origins for African Americans with regard to myth. It's those that come from the water and those that fly in the sky. Now, there's the one myth of Black folks being able to fly from the plantations back to Africa, coming back.
Flying Africans. Great story.
Right.
Big
right.
folklore work, yeah.
And then there are those who decided that life as an enslaved human being in America was not going to happen, and they jumped overboard. And their spirits kind of combined to, you know, create myth along the border of the coast to the islands. So you see a lot of that in the Gullah culture. So I was, all right, look, if that's the case, I separated my families and started to come up with ideas as to which side will do what. And my aunties and my women are all of the air. So I'm putting them on church fans is representative of the breeze.
Why do they get the air?
I mean, they fly. You know, most aunties are super fly. You know?
That was so much simpler than I thought.
Right. I mean, but where do we get the terminology of fly?
Yeah,
right?
Okay.
It's a part of our culture. Like, you fly. And it starts with the women first, you know, and then it goes to the men. But the men coming from the ocean and coming from out of the sea made much more sense, because to me, it would make sense that they would be coming from out of the ocean. So there's a couple of pieces over there that have men coming from out of the ocean and the women. Now, the thing is that on those fans, the aunties are there, and and that's the emulsions that I made so it starts with the church fan, then I take a photo of it, I created an emulsion, put it on top of what's known as a goose, like a goose wing, which is a quilting design. And this quilting design is meant to give you direction as to escape through different plantations. So if you look at these pieces, the key holder pieces, you will see there's direction as to which directions you ought to go. So it's actually a map. And that's why I call it key holder, because it gets you out of where you are.
Oh, that's fascinating. I love that.
Yeah.
And then a few of them have like quotes in between the photography.
Those come from games.
Really?
Yeah, because I'm a collector of all things old. So it's these were old games that they used to play on the trains. So this is tying in the being on the train and having these little games that they would play. It was little card games and things like that. But I only found a few of them. And it's conversations that were like, you would have to guess the other side.
Okay.
Right, of what's going on. But I fell in love with them because I was like, man, these are deep. You know, some of these seem to have deeper meaning, but the answer's on the other side, but I glued it down. So it's just kind of like.
So you're just playing to us now, making us answer that for ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like an endless question, endless answers.
And it's cool because these games, you know, these are cards that have been played with by however many Black folk coming up from the South.
Let's say, here we are with the migration again. It's a really interesting way to do that.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, you know, it's imbued into the work.
That's what I really love about your work, is that from when I walk up the stairs and I'm, you know, looking at it, I'm just thinking about you behind that lens, because I know you, right? But also your models and the regalness that you give them, the history that you seem to already imbue in these portraits, but then we get here to sit here and talk to you, and then I recognize the fact that you're doing a whole bunch of research.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you're not just taking that photograph, but you're trying to give us some really deep historical context to how you got there.
I do the majority of my work is research and making sure that everything not just makes sense, but makes story. And I know that the power of what I can do, if I lay a story down and I want to inspire the next artist, or mentoring was a passion of mine. If I can mentor someone into a space that they pull their stories out and we can figure out that this has equal weight to that, and let's get all of those stories out. Because I think if you're not doing storytelling, it's part of what we are supposed to be doing anyway as African Americans. We are storytellers, and the stories are meant to do certain jobs. There's an upliftment, but there's also the narrative. There's the ethos again, and just making sure that we're able to tell stories that we can share equally or amongst each other. Like, I don't think that any particular one person is ever going to own what the missing history of what we are. But I think that we all can add to it. As much as everyone wanted to add and speak to Afrofuturism, well, you got Afro mythology, you got Afro-pessimism, you got tons of things happening on this wheel of ideas that center around us.
There's the humanity of it all, though. It's like, even though these themes are dealing with our historical context, I think that what's lovely about it is that the humanity in these pieces and in this photography can be understood and explored by anyone.
Right. And people who care about people understand when they see the work, they connect to the love that's imbued in it. Because all of it's about love, right? That's the one thing. I can't make a piece frivolously. It just doesn't work for me. Like, I've stripped down entire boards in this process. Like, nah, that ain't it. Because I'll sit with it and see if it's talking back to me. Is it really saying something to me? Is it holding up? And if it's not, it's gone. Like, it's got to go, because it's not adding anything to the entire narrative. And the subjects that I typically shoot, I don't shoot lots of people. I've stayed with the same 10 to 15 people over the past 10 years. And I think it's important to have those relationships because it's cool to watch them age. Like, photography tends to lean toward young and beautiful and not telling a truth a lot of times. There's the idea that everything's frozen in time and everyone is the same person over and over and over. I like when I can see some age happening through my subjects, because that helps me tell my story. I think the longest running person that I've been working with is Leticia Enos, and that little piece right there, that's her. But it's an emulsion, the little white one right there.
Okay.
That's an emulsion made from a photo that I took of her back in 2013. And I've been working with her since 2012. And, her face has been a part of every project that I've done. And how she's changed has helped me kind of navigate the changes in the work too.
It's a real beauty in that journey, especially when we're talking about you recapturing a lot of these histories from photographs that people don't own and possess in their families anymore. Right. And now you're keeping like this bond together with your models, with your subjects. And so maybe we could just start to flow into the work into this room, because I'd love to know how collage starts to propel this story forward for you.
Yeah. Well, first, just on that thought of, photos and memory, like, this is a piece, Homegirls. This was a piece that was made on the memory of a photo. And it's a photo that I lost and I was searching for, and I was looking high and low, and I think I lost it maybe 4 years back. But it's from my teenage years when I had taken my mom's Pentax K1000 camera, and I was shooting black and white. I thought I was hot, It's like 80, I think I shot this like 86 or 87. We were still teenagers, and we were all sitting on the steps, and just hanging out. And I'm just snapping away. And this is my friend Chanel, who shows up in a lot of my work, and Shadeen. And these are just girls from off the block, but they were like family to me too, because we all grew up together. And I was looking for the photo because I wanted to do a really, serious collage around their identities, and I couldn't find it. And I think I looked for almost a year before I gave up. And I just was like, all right, I ain't got it. So I go to my mom's house and I call Chanel's mom and I get in touch with Shadeen, and they gave me photos of Chanel and Shadeen. And then I made composites of their face and just constantly, one layer over another, parts of her mother, parts of her sister, parts of her, to get this composite going. And Shadeen did the same thing. And then I finally got to a place where I was like, all right, this is it. I feel comfortable with these faces, because that's what I'm doing. I'm taking people from my life, but creating composites based on the people around them, or different parts of their lives. And then digitally painting them over and over again, cutting them out, rephotographing them, put it back into the computer again, and getting to a place where I feel comfortable with it. Like, it feels real. It feels like memory. It feels like a painting. It feels like a photograph. Like, I want to get everything to a place where it's hitting all those places for me at once. And this, I remember that I had to put this in here, the double foot, because in the photo, she's tapping her foot. Oh. And it was a double, like you can see in the slow shutter speed, her foot going up and down. And you'll see that in a lot of the pieces where you'll see this sort of illusion of, double exposure. It's just me remembering the photograph doing that, and re-representing that into the pieces. But how I started even doing photography was I always wanted to do, like, I started out as a painter. My aunt, she was an awesome painter. She went to Boston, I think it was Boston, she was BMass. You know what school I'm talking about?
Nope.
I know. Mass art. Thank you. Mass art. Yes. So she went there, and when she would be coming back and forth, between semesters, she was teaching me how to paint, and I was just loving it. So I was like, all right, great. This is, I'm already drawing. I'm already feeling good. I'm 8, 10 years old. This is like helping me hone the things that I want. And then by the time I'm old enough to say I want to go to art school, I want to go to college, I go to Tyler. I get into Tyler, and then that first year I hated it.
Why?
It was ridiculously racist stuff happening, and I can't even color it any other way.
I only ask because you've been in several institutions where you've been a professor teaching this now.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of what we're talking about happens in those institutions where you're being taught to remove that.
That's exactly it. Yeah. It was stripping down everything that I bring to the table. I was bringing things to the table that these professors just did not want to deal with in their personal lives. I could see that. But then I was like, okay, I was astute enough to understand that that's just the way it is. So let me go talk to the dean and ask better questions about what it is to be an artist. So I walked up to the dean's office one day and I asked, I was like, so I graduate, then what? And he had no solid answer for me. There was no good, clear answer as to what it is that I could do or how I could do it. So I was like, all right, I'm out of here. Because you can't take away the talent. Like, that's a God-given talent. Mm. So I'll always have that, but I needed to figure out how to make the talent make sense in my life. So I dropped out of Tyler, went to work at Procter & Gamble, stayed there for a while. And then I ended up coming back to Temple's main campus and did a triple major, public relations, journalism, marketing. It was JPRA, journalism, public relations, advertising, and then a minor in marketing.
And just putting this to the side?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Like, I was still making collage at this point in time, but it wasn't driving my practice had been on quiet for a while. But once I realized that, the internet was going to be a thing, this is 94 through 98, I've realized like, oh man, people are going to need art. because I was working in a space where the internet was blank, but I could see that images were going to be a thing. So I decided to refocus my energy, get back into photography. I start doing photography again once I get out of school, but I'm working in PR, and I'm seeing how image driven everything is. Mm-hmm. And I was like, man, this is where it's about to happen, So we're mid 2000s, and then I start seeing, the internet is doing its thing, and then Instagram came, and my photography was, I was doing street photography, but I didn't even know what it was called because I didn't have a connection to photographers like that. I didn't know what I was doing was similar to what a Jamel Shabazz was doing, or a Joseph Rodriguez was doing. I was about to say,
like, for all the crap we give art school and the things that we want to be taught there, mm-hmm. It does force you to come out and feel like you're discovering that on your own.
Yeah.
Like this rediscovery of what someone's already done. You don't know that they've done it, but I think that if you knew it, you wouldn't push forward and do this.
Yeah, and I don't think I would have taken the same route. Yeah. If I knew that I was in a canon.
Because I don't think Shabazz knew, like, when you hear him talk, like, he is just taking photographs.
Like I
what
told
he thinks
him
is fly in his neighborhood.
No, I told him, I was like, he's an accidental sociologist.
Yeah.
That's literally what he is. He's an accidental sociologist. And I've told him that multiple times because, he was the person who helped me get fine-tuned into what I was doing with photography. Right. And he never showed me anything about a camera. He just showed me how to do this with people, like get to a place where you could get the best picture out of a person. It wasn't about a camera, ever.
Okay.
It's like, just follow me around, kid, and you'll see how it works. So I start doing that, but I always wanted to get back to doing the collage work. So I'm taking photos with the intent to eventually use them for collage. And this is where the silhouette work comes in, because I'm like in frame creating, collage with light and shadow. And that was just making me super happy. But I was not doing the work of a photographer in my mind. I was just being an artist using a tool to make art.
I think that's what's made you so successful in a lot of different realms. Because you're in film, you're in photography, and like you said, advertising in these print campaigns is because of the very specific way that you have been seen.
From the outside.
Right.
Yeah. And I've enjoyed that. I've enjoyed not being stuck with one thing. And I think getting to this place where I'm making the collages that I've always wanted to make in the way that I wanted to make them, and inspired by the artists that I've always wanted to showcase. Like, you look at my work, I'm going to tell you flat out, like, Jacob Lawrence is in there. Like, I love Jacob Lawrence's painting. Like, I'm the biggest copycat fiend when it comes to Jacob Lawrence. I love how he sees the Black figure in abstraction and how motion is captured in his paintings. I'm thrilled with that. Obviously, Romare Bearden as well. And, to some degree, Barclay Hendricks is in there. You can't talk about the Black figure without thinking about how Barclay, revolutionized how we look at the Black figure.
Your palette also, let me just say, the palette is very reminiscent of that as well, and a very lovely homage. I love that.
Yeah. And the thing about this work, so I started with the primary colors intentionally. For one, I was kind of like stuck on a John Baldessari kick for a while. I don't know if anybody knows John Baldessari's work, but he's really cool and does weird things in photography and graphics. But I was looking at all his work with just his primary colors. And I was like, man, that's such a cool jumping off point. And I was like, it would be good for me to have some way of referencing that this is a start. So I wanted to make sure that all this work is grounded in just primary colors first. Mm-hmm. So everything else will evolve out of it, but we can trace it back, because for me, color is everything. It tells the story of how people sort of sit in their spaces and what kind, like, especially in Black neighborhoods, I love how color dictates what is where. Mm. Like, not just the what is what, but the what is where. Like, right. The corner is always a bright spot. The corner has always given you bright corners, and it's like that dictates that this is a spot for commerce, or this is a spot for beauty. Like, certain colors speak to certain activities, and you could just automatically drop, yourself in any black neighborhood and make your way through a neighborhood just looking at color. Like, I was in Orlando, just walking through the hood, and I was like, man, I was making my way through. Now all of a sudden I come across a whole pink church. And I was like, whoa, you know what I mean? But it told me a lot about what the neighborhood was about. I was like, okay, I know that there's some Caribbean folk here for sure.
Right.
Because regular old black folk ain't doing that. You know what I mean? I was like, this is where it's at. I was like, all right, so cool. I get to navigate that, and then I find a little pocket of Haitian folks, and then I go get to eat, you know, because I know what I'm going to go eat.
Right.
You know, I make my way around, and then I see where the colors stop, and things start to get a little stark, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm about to get into where the trap is. Sure enough, right around the corner, you know, it's like you see where the colors stop, and things start to change, and different things are occurring. I was like, yeah, okay, I can do that anywhere, though.
It's like neighborhood color theory. I was just, Renee Musai, the beautiful curator who did, you know, Michelin show, she referred to it as temperatures, and I had never heard of that before. So you keep walking through the different temperatures of the work, and I'm like, what? I'm like, oh, the color palettes, how they make us feel, how they're very indicative of who we are as people of color. But I feel like we would be talking about this forever, and I'm trying to look at the time. So maybe we could just open it up to the audience so that you guys can get a chance to talk with Shawn.
Yes.
Thank you for the work, obviously, and I really like the story about the church bands because I was going to ask about your process, and I'm curious. You mentioned research for a lot of the work that requires that research, whether it may be academic or estate sales. Does that work in parallel with how various details unfold in the imagery, and then how do you decide that the story you want to tell is complete?
You know, the story tells you when it's complete. That's the cool part about having puzzle pieces. You know, it's basically you're looking at a puzzle, especially when you get these works from estate sales, and you have to figure it out by just laying all the pieces out and understanding that there's a spectrum of time. You're lucky to find a location that all makes sense for everything. Like, for case in point, there's this one body of work that I have around this church. And I realized it was the same church because in every photo, after every service, I could see in the background this giant propane tank in the field. Okay, seeing it from this way, from that way, from this way, from that way. I was able to lay it all out and figure out, okay, this set of photos was taken this year, but I could tell you where everyone was within this thing, this propane tank. Move forward, it's still there. 10 years down the line, it's still there, but the people have changed. So now that I know I have a place, I can start figuring out the people. And then you can see little ones growing up, and you see them getting a little older, and you see the old folks disappear, which means that some of them may have passed away. And to me, that's like making the puzzle, but then it's working backward. And it's like, okay, so what kind of church was this? What kind of area was this? What were the economics of the situation? What's happening after the fact? So once you get the pieces together and you can kind of figure things out, then you can dive down into the data. And thankfully, census data is pretty easy to grab a hold of. And now that we have this really great system of finding things on maps, like, you can go to Google Maps pretty easy and kind of tie. Coolest thing that I discovered is that tree lines stay the same. Tree lines stay the same. They all grow together, but they grow in similar fashion, So I've been able to match tree lines from images in GPS now to tree lines back then. And there might be slight variation, but if you have something that's a constant, like a propane tank or a building, you can line things up and find out, like, okay, so this was the area. And then the research comes after that. And whatever I find, I try to get as much as I can, but it gets harder as you get deeper because it starts to go, you hit the census, and then it's personal information, and then it's kind of like disparate and spread apart, and you can go down there. I've gone to these places and tried to find people. You're going to get, yes, I'll talk to you, or no, I'll talk to you. Or no, I'm not talking to you. Or ain't nobody here anymore. That kind of thing. And when you find places that are just completely wiped off the map, that's even harder. Like one of my favorite photos that I have that I've yet to work on, it's this group of about 60 black folk sitting in front of this place called Cotton Liquors. And you can clearly see the street signs, the cross intersection. I'm like, oh man, for me, this is gold. This is a win. I look it up and it's a Best Buy now. You know what I mean? Because I'm thinking, damn, I'm about to 60 people in front of this place, and I have no idea what the context of the moment is. Like they're just out there. There's a motorcycle going by. There's people laughing, and everyone's looking the same way. It bugs out of me that I don't know what they're looking at or why they're all doing that. I go and I look on the map. It's a Best Buy, and I'm like, man. So whatever neighborhood was there is also gone. And trying to find out that information it's time consuming, and sometimes you have to just accept that, okay, that's the end of the story before you even get to open it. But at least you have this image, and at least it was real. You know that it's real. So the research, I will tell you, the research can be equally heartening and also disheartening. Because sometimes you see some sad things, and a lot of secrets. There's a lot of secrets that I have in my possession that people, because the photos are their secrets. Couples, same-sex couples that were keeping it quiet, couples that were not supposed to be couples because they had other relationships, and I find that like, oh, this is, you see it in the picture you put together, and you're like, oh, okay, that's why these pictures are, over here. You find things out, and you become this bearer of the secrets, and some of that doesn't require research because you have to honor that they wanted to keep it low key. I hope that answers it. No doubt. Yeah. Okay. It's the draw. Who?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm so in awe of your work. Thank you both for this conversation.
Thank you.
It's really incredible to hear about. I have two questions. One is, have you ever explored your personal photography from your family, and does that provoke that kind of research? I'd love to hear about that. And then the second one is, in the process of using the esteemed photos, I'm just imagining the process, and it seems like those photos are so sacred. And is there, in your process, I guess I don't really understand the way that you work entirely, but is there a creation destruction thing that is happening? Like, do those original photographs get destroyed in your process, but then come alive in your creation?
I love that you asked that. So what you're seeing throughout is family. These are representations of folks in my family. Just off the bat, I'll take a photo from my family's collection, and like you can't, like an image like this, that's a snapshot that just happens. I love the composition of bodies, but I'm not going to use the same faces in the image. I'll composite those images. I'll figure out a way to change it. I'll stack faces on one another. But I do have a body of work that honestly, almost ripped my family apart for all intents and purposes. It's called These Subtle Declarations. I took all the men of my family and I got all the photos of them that I could find that were the original photos, and got them from separate members of the family. I just started cutting them, and without even asking questions, without asking permission, without making duplicates. Yes, that's exactly what everybody in my family did. They had great pause and a lot of anger about it, but it was necessary for me to have this cathartic moment, because to be able to separate myself from what their desires for me were to be, is the little cutting of those connections, but reconnecting them to their philosophies. So my uncle and my grandfather will be, I have one piece called Totem, and you'll see it's stacked up, but it's grandfather, father, uncle, and it's all of them and their ideas and their philosophies, creating this totem, this thing, this masculinity I'm supposed to respect and become. And I needed to do that. I needed to I needed to define what I thought I should be by making sure that everyone saw me physically making something else, not only out of the images, but out of myself. And yeah, it was tough. It was really tough because it hurt a lot of people's feelings, because I'm also shattering this patriarchal view and all these symbols and shrines that these images represent. And I'm like, but they're still here. These are still the same photos. These are still the same individuals. These are still the men we knew. I'm just dissecting who and what they are to me. Some people in my family were like, all right, cool. Other ones were, not so cool about it, and still to this day, not happy about it. But that's part of what collage is meant to do. Collage is not saving. Part of it is about hoarding and keeping, but the real through point is where the destructiveness happens and has to happen. You can have thousands of photos and thousands of pieces of this, that, and the other, all these little things that you'll say to yourself you're going to use one day, but if you don't, you'll never get to that output. And for me, making all of this was sort of going through that archive and figuring out like, okay, I'm going to use these photos and these compositions and this image or this memory and get it back out there and make it make sense. I think if you're spending too much time as a collage artist hoarding, you're hurting yourself. Plus also, in my opinion, if you're not making work that tends to be a bit destructive, you won't get to that really high creative side.
So are you taking accountability for reconstructing their memories?
I will take accountability for being the catalyst for that, because I can't say that what I'm actually doing is reconstructing memory. But if it does work that way, then cool. But if it forces someone to have to look at it in a new way and create a new memory, I'll own that.
Take that.
Yeah. But I'm also asking, for all intents and purposes, like, let's re-examine who they were. Like, not everyone in my family or in anyone's family is 100% sane, and maybe this seems to be a useful way of literally dissecting those identities. But yeah, I enjoy doing that. I enjoy taking the work and running it through that course, and then whatever comes. Now, with other found works, I do my best to destroy the identities as best I can. This was based on a photo, but then I ended up using people that I'm more familiar with, family members, So, case in point, Aquavius is 3 of my cousins combined. He's 3 of my cousins combined. And this over here, Big Stroll and Syl, those are my parents. But if you saw them, like, this is just a representation of them. These are actually the friends of my father. Like, there's 3 of my father's friends combined and a few of my mom's friends combined to make them. So I love using the people around them too, because you are not just the you that is in this body, it's the people you choose to be around you as well. So you'll see their names pop up and they'll look different every time. That's because I'm choosing different times that, 1974, they were hanging around these people, let me use them, and create those new faces. Yeah. No problem. Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk about the decision to remove color from skin in photos. It's like in the silhouette work, you're often using the background or an accessory to pop of color and representing the skin in grayscale. And then in these newer ones, you're maybe adding in a blue tone, but removing the original skin tone.
Yeah. So the blue comes from, I don't know, have you ever been in a neighborhood where you see a braiding salon or a hair salon, and the signs for what styles they want, it's all bleached out in blue?
Yeah.
That's where that comes from. I absolutely love how that color turns into this sort of accidental cyanotype, and it looks super cool. And it all came from a photo that I took about 10 years ago of a relaxer ad in someone's window in my neighborhood. And the girl's on the side, she had a super fly bob hairstyle. I was like, man, that looked, it looked really cool, but I loved how the blue, like I knew it was there for over 10 years. I loved knowing that time has done something. So the blue is just to give you an idea that this is about time and being exposed to the element of time. So that's what the blue means in all these, being exposed to everything that can happen to you within time. For silhouette work, for me, it's just paying homage. The process of creating image, from creating cameos and trace drawings all the way up to today, and how the silhouette basically encapsulates Black identity, but in a very flat way. It goes back to what you would see in some of the works by Aaron L. Douglas, a muralist and amazing painter. You'll see a lot of that, but then you'll see it in Romare Bearden's work. You'll see it in Jacob Lawrence's work. You'll see it repeated a lot. So for me, it's a matter of tradition. Like I'm big on African American art traditions and carrying it forward. So a lot of that is an homage, but it's also moving it forward.
Any other questions? Jason, I think that, oh, I'm sorry.
Can you talk more about why you either explicitly reject or find insufficient the traditions of Afro-pessimism and Afrofuturism?
Say that again?
Can you say a little bit more about why you either explicitly reject or kind of find insufficient Afro-pessimism and Afrofuturism? You mentioned a little bit earlier before that. Can you talk a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so, Afrofuturism, I'll start there, because Afro-pessimism hasn't caught on as much as Afrofuturism. But Afrofuturism as a tool for folks to describe that there will be Black people in the future, it's kind of like throwing a ball with no one to catch it. No one's throwing it back. Right? This is where I hope we'll be. And wherever it may land is a random thing. It has nothing to do with rooting itself in any sense of contemporary placement or historical placement. It is a far-flung idea. Yes, we will be there, but where is not exactly sure. I like pinning things backward because we have a very clear understanding of what the past is, even though there's pockets of unknown histories and unknown archives. At least we know that there are some markers along the way of, well, we know this happened. And historically, we know this happened. And we can start filling in the blanks with a little bit more, I'd say with a little bit more evidence. And if we're even filling it in with story and storytelling, we have a much greater understanding of what's around to tell a great story that ties all these disparate parts together. Like for me, my favorite family story is an escape story that, it started in Virginia of two folks escaping off of a plantation, and they make their way across what's known as the Maryland Hundreds. And the Maryland Hundreds is 100 farms along this space, like right between Pennsylvania and Maryland. And the stories that happen along that way. Turns out it's just a myth. Like when I go and dig into it, it's not true, right? But it was a great story that gave me like, wow, like this is fantastic. I thought all these things. It wasn't true at all, but it gave color to what was going on for them at that point, but also gave them sort of a connection to, what was going on at the time, because they weren't connected to the process of slavery this way, but there was slavery in Delaware, right? And then for folks to try to explain, well, how did we get to this point? And this is just one pocket of my family. Trying to explain how we got to this point, and then how did we end up with all this land, after emancipation and all these other things that occurred. It was the color that needed to happen to cover a different story that was a little bit more easy to tell, like, oh, Mistress Holland, like Cyrus, she just decided, I'm going to sign it over to you because I don't want to do this. That's not a very interesting story, but they had to come up with something else to kind of fill in all these other blanks. So the past is a much easier place to fabricate, create, discover, and sort of connect. And I'm less concerned about the future, because the future is a place that we will always occupy in one way or another, but it's much harder to get to the future than it is to get to the past. We can access any part of the past right now, all of us together, but our futures are so disparate. And so, after we leave this room, take each person and then, multiply it by 10 to the third power. That's the opportunities you have for wherever everything's going to be. You wouldn't be able to guess where everything's going to happen. That's why I look at Afro mythology is more important for us to talk about who we are and why we are than Afrofuturism. Mm-hmm. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Appreciate you.